You ever want to see what a shit-eating grin looks like? You've come to the right place. Welcome to the Knicks Film School Postgame Show presented by BetUS. What a win and what a night for the New York Knicks. It feels funny, like calling them the embattled New York Knicks. They're off to their best 53 game start. I mean, even before this game, they were off to their best. They were going to be off to their best 53 game start in nearly 30 years. Before the Boston game, they had won, I think it was 7 of 8 games. And yet, as much consternation in the air following that Boston game as there was at any time this season, and I thought credit to James Edwards III. I'm going to shout him out from The Athletic. Wrote a great article today, and I think it touches on something that we've all been kind of dealing with and trying to figure out and navigate, both like fans who don't have a microphone in front of them and content creators, which is like how to talk about this team and how to praise this team when they do good stuff, but also acknowledge when they come up short, and especially acknowledge when they come up short in the moments that matter the most, which, make no mistake about it, they have done. And they need, until further notice, they need to prove that they will be able to overcome those last couple of hurdles. And that's fine. But I would be remiss to not sit here tonight after watching that victory. And I know what part of the narrative is going to be. Part of the narrative is going to be Indiana was far from their best. Indiana kicked the ball around. What Indiana did tonight, a team does, especially a team like Indiana, which, again, they're not Boston, they're not Cleveland, they're not Oklahoma City. And you saw the TNT graphic if you were watching on TNT over the last 25 games coming into tonight. There's no team in the league that has a better record than Indiana Pacers. So whoever you want to put in that next tier after those top 3 teams, Indiana has been in that tier for about half of the season, winning some really impressive games and playing some really impressive ball. You don't make a team go out there and look as bad as they looked tonight without forcing the issue. And I think if we were going to characterize the Knicks' struggles against not only the elite teams in the league this year, thinking of the second Oklahoma City game for sure, thinking of the fourth quarter in the first Oklahoma City game, thinking of both Boston games, and even thinking of some other games. Like, how about the last Indiana game that they played? And there are some other ones that we could point to. They've been characterized by allowing other teams to, and I've used this term before, dictate terms to them. And that's why I think even as they shot out to a good record going into the new year and won a bunch of games in a row, the fans that had major concerns about this team said, okay, great. Wake me up when you're not taking it to some patsy, and show me when you're able to go up against a good team or maybe even a great team and exert your will. And even going further than that, and this is the reason why I think this game was so significant, show me that you could do it in different ways. And I think part of the reason that there was a genuine amount of excitement heading into the Boston game is that the not only had the Knicks attained some quality wins in the weeks leading up to that night, but they had started to figure out ways to win games in different ways. And I think tonight, against an Indiana Pacers team that, again, not only was this team playing very well, but I don't think this team lacked for confidence one bit against the Knicks after obviously winning 3 of the last 4 games in the playoff series a year ago, doing what they did to the Knicks in their most recent matchup. I know it was a while ago, but still. And even more than that, seeing the Knicks' weak spots and seeing Nick weak spots that they have not been able to solve. And those weak spots were exploited against the Boston Celtics, who are in many ways a one-of-one team in the league, which is why I was a lot of reasons that I was a bit miffed by some of the conversation surrounding this team over recent days. But the main one is like, okay, so we're going to draw certain conclusions when they played that team and that player and Jason Tatum as on fire as you're ever going to see him. And they were really, really good. And oh, by the way, the Knicks were missing their most important defensive player. So coming into this game, the Knicks were coming off that effort, and they were still missing that most important defensive player in OG Anunoby, who covers up for so many ills. And throughout the first half, I mean, yeah, the Knicks were up 8 at the half, but they also gave up 60 points. And they gave up 60 points at the half to a team that was not shooting particularly well from deep. So the signs were there that they had not really fixed what ailed them. And more concerning than that is the fact that their best player was sitting there with I don't know how many points Jalen Brunson had at the half. It was not very many. And he was struggling. Here, I'll pull it up right now. At halftime, Jalen Brunson had 6 points. So not exactly his best effort on 3 of 10 shooting. Well, you figured if they were going to figure out a way to win this game, especially the way the defense looked in the first half, they were going to have to get a special second half effort from Jalen Brunson. And what did Jalen Brunson do in the second half? He made 1 field goal, scored 2 points, and played a couple of, like, frankly, inconsequential minutes because the game was already over by that point. This was not, for really one of the very, very few times for this team, not only this season, but going back since the day Jalen Brunson arrived, a Jalen, there have been some games where it's like, Jalen, we've come this far, take us from here. There, you could really count the number of significant wins against teams, good teams that have been playing well, where they figured out ways to win that really did not involve Jalen Brunson at all. You could count those games probably on one hand. Since not only this season, since Jalen Brunson arrived here with the Knicks. Tonight was as impressive as any of them. And we're going to talk about some individual player performances, obviously, because there are no shortage of ones to talk about. And even though there were a couple of players that put up some spectacular stat lines, I thought this was a team win. And specifically in the second half, the way this group of guys came together and fixed the thing for the most part, because it's never going to be perfect, but fixed the thing that had dogged them the most, which is when push comes to shove, can you get stops against an elite offense? I understand they did not have Miles Turner tonight, the Indiana Pacers, but the guy that they had filling in for him, Thomas Bryant, did a pretty serviceable job in Turner's absence. And certainly Bryant's presence instead of Miles Turner impacted the game on the other end of the floor. Knicks did put up 128 points tonight. Again, we're talking about a team. I'll go back to it. Reasons I'm a little miffed by the sky is completely falling. This Indiana team has not been a bad defensive team this year, especially as they've gone on this nice little stretch here over the last month and a half to 2 months. I understand Bryant was out. To put up 128 points when you're all-star, you're MVP candidate, and he's kind of, well, although now maybe Towns has moved back ahead of him, but he had moved ahead of Towns coming into tonight. Puts up 8 points on 11 shots, and you put up 128 points on that team's home floor when you hit 10 threes on the night. You took 27 threes, you had 10. So it's not like you were lighting it up from outside and getting lucky that way. That's goddamn impressive. But that's not the main story of this game. No, the main story of this game was you came together on the defensive end, and you did it with some unheralded players. I've been talking for 10 minutes, and if you're waiting for me to crow about Tom Thibodeau, I'll give you a little bit of something. I'm not gonna go full wrestling heel because I don't need to, because the whole conversation is ridiculous. I actually am curious, though. If you hang your hat entirely on the Tom Thibodeau is a bad coach, he should not be the coach of this team, and any major errors or any major ills that befall them are his fault, and until they get rid of him, they're not going to accomplish anything significant. What do you have to do when that narrative goes down the shitter and you look like an absolute ass clown? Should you be made to wear some sort of a dunce cap and take a picture, like a selfie? That's what the kids call it, a selfie, and post it on social media? I mean, if I was one of these people who nobody pays attention to anything they say anyway, I would probably do that because it might actually attract attention to me. But what do I know? Tibbs went with a lineup in the second half that had it going in a way that, like, hey, what do you know? Indiana can't seem to get everywhere they want to go on the floor against this group with Cam Payne. I know who was in because Jalen Brunson picked up his fifth foul, but how long did Cam Payne stay in the game? And Landry Shamet, let's give some praise to Landry Shamet. Thank you for showing up, Landry Shamet. And obviously Deuce McBride, who is going to be not getting the headlines of this game because Kat and Josh Hart are going to get those. But him and Payne together, as significant a performance by two Knicks bench players as we have seen in any game this season. Deuce McBride and Cam Payne. Cam Payne being able to run the offense and doing a feisty as hell job on defense. And Deuce McBride coming in. What did he do? He went 4-4 from deep. How significant were those as the Knicks offense was struggling at times during this game? And then you throw in the efforts of Precious Achiuwa, which I thought were good. A guy who has kind of been, raked over the coals here and there because of some of the lineup difficulties that have. And again, some of the stuff that Tibbs has done recently, it hasn't worked. The fact that he went back to the Huck Porty, Achiuwa, Hart lineup, I was like, oh my God, Tom, what are we doing here? Went for it for a few minutes, didn't work, pulled the plug. But what you saw in the second half, that's reading the room. And that's trusting your, people always talk about how because he goes to his starter so often and he plays his starter so many minutes, how are the other guys gonna really, the end of bench players? How are they going to respond to that? Are they going to be able to be as engaged as some of these coaches that play, 10, 11, and 12 deep? Hey, Rick Carlisle plays his guys a whole lot of minutes. How prepared did they look tonight to contribute to winning? The Knicks bench, they were ready. And they were ready in large part, and I've been burying the lead, in large part because of the efforts of two guys who, one is an all-star, and it's funny, I saw a stat going around or from somebody on one of the social media apps today about how Domantas Sabonis, after he was not named an injury replacement for Anthony Davis, he remains the first player in NBA history to average, I think it's 18 points, some amount of rebounds, and some amount of assists that hasn't made an all-star team. I'd like to know how many players have Josh Hart's stat line, which is not Sabonis' stat line. He doesn't score as many points, doesn't get as many rebounds. But how many players who have averaged Josh Hart's stat line for a season have not made an all-star team? I can't imagine it's too many. And Josh Hart tonight, unequivocally, played like an all-star. He was the most important player in the second half for the Knicks by far. And I would go so far as to say, I know Towns put up 40 on 23 shots in a majestic offensive performance from Karl-Anthony Towns, mostly in the first half, which is when the team really needed him. But overall, you're not going to see a better offensive performance from a center this side of Nikola Jokic than we just got from Kat tonight. And I think Hart one-upped him. The effort and the intangibles and every weak spot that Indiana team had, there was Josh Hart picking at it. Hello, Obi Toppin. There's a reason you never got the trust of this coach, and it's because of stuff like that. Play after play after play until he couldn't stay on the court anymore. And whatever openings you give Josh Hart, he's going to take him. Now, is he a perfect player? No. Are there going to be teams, the elite teams, who don't give him openings? Yeah. Boston's one of them. We saw it on Saturday night. And that's why there's always going to be the conversation until he proves them wrong that, okay, Josh, can you do it against the teams that really don't have any weaknesses and that will use the one thing that you don't do well against you? That's what remains to be seen. Karl-Anthony Towns, I just talked about a majestic offensive performance. He had some moments defensively in the second half for sure, but there were also a lot not so great defensive moments. That's another one. Remains to be seen. So I don't want to sit here and pretend that this win cures all of the ills in Knicksdom, all of the concerns about can you beat the very best that were here yesterday are still here today. I get that. It's totally fine. But to go back again to that James Edwards article, just because the expectations have raised and they are higher, and this team is shooting for a championship, not next year, not the year after that, this year, that's the goal, and it should be the goal, and they should be held to that standard. Not to get into whole conversations about what's a failure and you know what would be considered just a complete waste of this whole year. Those conversations aren't that interesting to me. The interesting conversation is this team has built or this franchise has built a roster that is capable of winning it all. And I think every time you see additional evidence that, hey, maybe if this team figures some things out, they could scale that mountaintop. I think it's worth getting excited about. And I think it's worth celebrating. And tonight, what you saw against, again, a team that was coming in playing really solid basketball, what you saw against them tonight, to do it in the way they did, which is a way that they do not typically do it, without really getting anything from their best player and their leader, that tells you a lot about this Knicks team. And if you are someone who does still want to give yourself over to believing, like, hey, maybe this roster is good enough, and hey, maybe this coach shouldn't be sent out with yesterday's trash, and hey, maybe the front office, they took a justifiable risk trading for Karl-Anthony Towns, even with the deficiencies that he has and he brings with him from Minnesota. If you're someone who still wants to believe, if you're someone who still wants to get excited about this team, if you're someone who still wants to enjoy, again, the best Knicks start in nearly 30 years, and not only harp on all the things seemingly that are wrong and that they can't do, I hope tonight is a night that can make you smile and that can make you feel good about what you just saw. Because that, more than any X's and O's, more than any rotation, more than any of the nonsense that we spend time talking about, that was a character win. That was heart. That was no pun intended. That was grit. That was guts. That was culture. That's what that win was. So, good job by this team. And good job by everybody who, has refused to give it into the sky is falling. As tempting as some people make it. Let's do Autograph signature moment of the game, presented, of course, by our friends at Autograph. I'll have a 3x3 video coming your way on the Autograph app sometime later this week. Probably Thursday. It's weird. There's no obvious like game-saving play or anything in this one. A lot of the big plays in this game were made in the third quarter. I could really go in about half a dozen different directions. I am going to go with Josh Hart. Of course, I'm going to go with the Josh Hart play. It happened in the middle of the third quarter, actually. It was the play right before Jalen Brunson came back in the game where Hart went for 30. It was his 29th and 30th point. And after a really good defensive possession, Hart ended up scoring. And, of course, as he has become very adept at doing, signals to the Pacers bench for them that they should probably call a timeout as they were down 116 to 100. and the game essentially at that point was over. So that is your autograph signature moment of the game. Go check out the autograph app. If you don't have it, use code KFS when you download and get rewarded for your fandom. All right. Last thing real quick before I get to quick word from our friends at Rocket Money. 2 quick shout outs. One, my buddy Mark Sable, who's been such a long time supporter of Knicks Film School. He is out in California, had to relocate to, I believe it was San Diego, affected obviously by everything that's been going on over there. I realize, and I know it's been a couple games since I've done any Girl Scout cookie shout outs, but my wife said to me, who's Mark Sable? I was like, why? He bought a bunch of Girl Scout cookies. I'm like, no, he didn't. He's dealing with freaking house issues and having to relocate and wearing masks in LA. Well, Mark Sable, because he's just a mensch, bought some Girl Scout cookies. So Mark Sable, shout out to you, my friend. Friend of the pod, also Mark Sable. I will never forget that conversation we had. That was a lot of fun. And then the second shout out goes to my new buddy Matthew, who came to New York all the way from Scotland, visiting some friends. He went to the Celtics game. I think he's going to the Hawks game tomorrow. And we met up earlier today, and he was kind enough to bring all the way over from the other side of the pond this lovely bottle of Highland Park. And I don't drink as many single malts as I used to. I've turned more into bourbon now. But let me tell you, Matthew, this is absolutely delicious. And it is making this win all that much sweeter. You were right. This stuff is freaking delicious.